Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We are going to start lecture number 3. This lecture number 3 is following the lecture number 2, in which we study the background to demand, and now basically we are going to talk about background to supply. In the particular chapter, we finished in the last class, we were discussing that what creates demand in the economy, and we saw that the utility that we get from the consumption of goods, from consumption of services, creates demand. And since the demand curve shows all those quantities that people are willing to buy or demand at different prices, that also is based on the law of diminishing marginal utility. As we have learned that when the quantity is more, you give less value to it, and that is why you are willing to pay less price for that. And that is why whenever the producers want you to get more quantity, they have to give you incentive in terms of lesser price, because nobody gives equal importance to all unit of commodities. Like, say for example, as we were discussing, if you have got already 2 pair of shoes available and the producers want you to buy the third pair, you will not buy the third pair unless you get the advantage, or you get the incentive to buying that particular pair of shoes. So this is what actually was the background to demand, and we have learned about the different kind of theories, and we have learned that how the utility changes with the consumption of different units of the commodities. Now we are going to talk about background to supply. What creates supply? What works behind the supply curve? Like we discussed about the demand curve shows all those quantities which consumers are willing to buy at different prices or willing to demand at different prices. Similarly, the supply curve is a curve that shows all those prices at which producers are willing to supply different quantities. We can imagine that the producers feel more incentive when the prices goes up. They supply more. Whenever the price goes up, the quantity supplied increases. This is in contrast to the relationship we studied for the demand curve, because from the demand side, if the price of any commodity increases, its quantity demanded decreases. But in case of the supply, the quantity supplied increases when the price of a commodity increases. So we are going to learn in this chapter that what causes this supply. Like, say for example, when producers supply more, when producers supply less, and what stimulates those supplies, what makes these supplies possible, and why and how producers decide to supply more and supply less. So you can imagine about it that on the decision, on the back of this decision of supply, there must be the consideration of the cost of production. Like, say for example, if I ask you that at this price, how much are you willing to sell, you will be determining your supply, you will be determining your quantity supplied on the basis of your cost of production. Like, say for example, if your cost of production is less and the price being set in the market is high, then you will be supplying more. If the price that is market setting is low and the cost of production is high, you will supply less. And in case if your price of the commodity is less than the cost of production that you are incurring to produce that good, you will not be supplying at all in the market. Rather, you will be taking the supply out of the market. So we will be learning about the background to supply in this particular chapter. We shall be learning that how the supply decision changes when different factors of cost of production changes. Okay. So this is the background to supply, the short-run theory of production. When you talk about the supply decisions, these supply decisions are taken in two different time horizons. दो किस्म के जो time periods हैं, उनके अंदर different decisions producers लेते हैं production के. एक time period कहलाता है short run और दूसरा time period कहलाता है long run. The short run is a time period in which at least one of the factors of production is constant, and long run, according to microeconomic theory, is a period in which all of the factors of production can be varied. By the varied, we mean like, you can change, increase or decrease all of your factors of production. Like say, for example, in the long run, if a firm finds that its demand is continuously increasing, they can increase both capital and labor. But in the short term, they only can increase the supply of labor. They cannot increase the capital. Like you cannot increase the size of plant every year. You cannot increase the number of plants every year. You cannot have more buildings every year. You cannot have got more buildings every half year or every month. But you can vary the supply of the labor, which you cannot do with the capital. So capital remains the same for certain period, and the period in which you cannot change your capital, that period is called the short run. अरे अब आपका जो प्रोडक्शन का जो डिसीजन है, अब नाउ आपके पास सिचुएशन ये है कि आपके पास यू हैव गॉट लाइक से फॉर एग्जांपल जो लेबर है वो एंड द कैपिटल है, कैपिटल आपके पास फिक्स्ड है, capital is fixed and your labor is variable. You can only change the variable. So whatever more production you want to do, you can only do in the short run by changing the labor supply. Like if you increase number of labors, you can increase total production. What you cannot do is you cannot change the amount of capital. So you have got this constraint and you will be taking decisions accordingly. So we are going to learn the theory of production in the short run, and in the short run, you only can vary the labor, you cannot vary the capital, but in the long run, you can vary both. You can vary capital as well as labor. All right. So this is what something is important here. And this is actually the short run theory of production. And this short run theory of production is really important to understand that how producers take decisions in a condition when they can only change labor and they cannot change capital. All right. Now, what is the aim of the firm? The firm is like say, for example, what was the aim of a consumer? The aim of the consumer was utility maximization. When you buy something, when you buy clothes, when you buy food, when you buy anything from the market, what do you want to achieve from that? You want to get the utility from those all products and you want to maximize your utility. But being a producer, you actually want to maximize your profit. And the profit is always, is the profit is equal to the revenues minus expenditures. So you want to either increase your revenues or you want to decrease your expenditures to increase your profit, and you want to get the maximum profit possible. It is as same as for the consumer. The consumer tries to maximize the utility. Like when you buy a computer, you want to buy the best computer. When you buy clothes, you want to buy the best clothes. When you buy a pen, you want to buy the best pen. And the pen that can actually fulfills your requirement. Like say, for example, if you want to write in very good flow, you use ball pens. If you want to write, you have got different considerations. If you want to write bold, you have to write small, what do you have to write? You have to you choose the pen accordingly. All right. So you buy the pen that maximizes your utility. But like here, the producers look for profit and they actually do the production with the objective of maximization of profit. And there are also other aims that are defined in the modern economics. Like say, for example, now the firms are supposed to be a good citizens of the society. They also have to play a role in the development of the society, in the growth of the society, or in the, like say, for example, in making society more safer, more greener, more cleaner. And there are these are the alternative theories, but the main theory of the firm is that they want to maximize their profits, and to increase their profits, they try to manipulate, they try to use the labor and capital in different proportions, and they produce different quantities, and they try to maximize the production which they do. And because once they maximize the production, they can automatically increase their level of profits by cutting down their costs or increasing their level of outputs. Now, if you look at the long run and short run production, Now, fixed and variable factors of production. As I told you that, like, when you have a short-term period, at least one of your factors of production is fixed, and the other factor of production is variable. And the fixed factors of production have got fixed costs, and variable factors of production have got variable cost. Like say for example, you have a phone at your home, like say for example PTCL phone. This PTCL phone has got two components of cost. Or say for example your electric meter has got two components. One actually is the meter charges that you have to pay no matter you use electricity or not. So this is a fixed cost. And the other cost that you have to pay for on the meter is that the energy consumption cost. Like say for example, if you use more electricity, you pay more cost. If you use less electricity, you pay less cost. So one component of that cost is a function of your consumption of energy, and the other component is not the function of your consumption component, rather it is the fixed part of your bill. Similarly, like if you talk about telephone, the telephone actually have got the line rent and the bill that you have to pay on the extra calls that you make over the month. So there are fixed factors of production. Like say for example, I was telling you that it is easy to vary number of people in the organization on the daily basis, but it is not easy to vary the amount of capital every day, every month even. Sometimes, and most of the times, this capital amount capital is changed once a year, or once in 5 years, or once in 10 years, depending on the nature of industry. The first theory we are going to study is the short-term theory of production. Just always keep remember, what are we trying to learn in this chapter is we are going to see what works behind the supply decisions of a firm. What makes a firm supply more and what makes a firm supply less. And you may imagine that that supply is of course related to the production. The more production you can do, the higher supply you can make in the market. So we are going to talk about the short-term theory of production. And short-term theory of production, again, will anybody recall from you, what do we mean by the short-term in microeconomics? I asked you to explain that what do we mean by the short-term in microeconomics, and the short-term in microeconomics means that a condition or a time period in which you cannot vary all of your factors of production. You can vary some, but your sum of the factors of production remain fixed. So the short-term theory of production, we are going to talk about, you will always have to keep remember, when we are talking about the short-term theory of production, we are keeping one of the factors of production constant. And rest of the production of the function can be varied. So you have a limited kind of power to change your production, because you can only change labor, you cannot change capital in the short run at least. Okay. As you remember, when we were talking about the utility theory, we learned about the law of diminishing marginal utility. Here, in the short run, we also observe the law of diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns. What does this law say? It says that when increasing amounts of a variable factor are used with a given amount of fixed factor, there will come a point when each extra unit of variable factor will produce less extra output than previous unit. देखिए, we are actually considering a situation here कि suppose करें कि आपके पास जो capital है, you have got capital के 10 units and labor you are increasing. Like say for example, initially when you increase the labor, your output does not fall, but suppose you have got 10 machines and 10 labor. Now if you keep increasing the labor, your output will not increase at the same rate, rather your output will start declining. if one of the factors of production is fixed and you keep increasing the other factor of production, like say for example, what is the returns to the output or return to the labor in Pakistan? In Pakistan, the returns of the labor is very, very low. Why returns of the labor is low? I was asking you that why the productivity of labor in Pakistan is very low. The reason is that we don't have got enough capital, or the capital is not increasing at the rate of the increase in the labor. Labor in Pakistan is increasing at a higher rate and capital in Pakistan is increasing at a lower rate. So for a small available amount of capital, we have got a very large number of people actually working on that particular capital. That is the reason that people are working on less number of machines. There are more people and less machines. It means that the productivity of the labor is very, very low. So this is called the law of diminishing returns, and specifically in the condition given in the theory, the other factor of production remains the same. Other factors of production remain the same means, like say for example, your capital is same, but your labor is like varying. So again, if you have got only 10 machines and you keep increasing labor in your firm, your labor's productivity will keep falling. Can this productivity be negative? Like say for example, when we were talking about the utility theory, after certain point of time, the utility of a person from a consumption of a good become negative. Can the output or the production of a variable factor of production be negative as well? Can the productivity or the returns be negative in case of the production? Can you reach a situation where employing one more labor does not increase your total production, rather increment of one more labor decreases your overall production? There is every possibility that the returns can be negative, and this only happens when the number of labor increases too much. देखिए, जब आपके पास एक ही प्लांट पे, एक ही जगह पे बहुत सारे लेबर आप बढ़ा देंगे, तो एक लेबर दूसरे लेबर के रास्ते में आएगा और वो उसको काम नहीं करने देगा. मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आपके पास एक से ज्यादा लेबर होंगे और वो बातें करना शुरू कर देंगे, तो बातें करते करते उनका जो, अगर मिसाल ज्यादा लेबर हो गए, वो ज्यादा टाइम, और इसके अलावा जब ज्यादा लेबर होंगे तो ये अंदाजा नहीं हो सकेगा ये किसका काम है. लेकिन आपको ये बात पता है कि वो काम जो कि सबका होता है वो किसी का नहीं होता. गली में अगर एक जो है वो कचरा पड़ा हुआ है और आप किसी आते जाते शख्स से बोलें कि यार ये कचरा आपकी गली में पड़ा हुआ है, आप इसको उठा दें, वो ये कहेगा ये मेरा काम नहीं है, सबका काम है. आप उसको छोड़ दें, दूसरा आएगा, आप उससे कहें कि भाई ये कचरा आपकी गली में पड़ा हुआ है, आप इसको उठा दें, वो कहेगा ये मेरा काम नहीं है, सबका काम है. जब सबका काम जो काम होता है वो किसी का काम नहीं होता. देखिए, आमतौर पे इसकी मिसाल आप लोगों को जाहिर है कि अपने घरों से भी मिल सकती है कि घर में अगर जो है वो मिसाल के तौर पर आपके पास एक से ज्यादा लोग किचन में काम करना शुरू कर दें, या बहुत ज्यादा लोग खवातीन अगर किचन में चली जाएं, तो अगर वो बातें करना शुरू कर दें, तो जितनी देर में एक खाना जो है वो, अगर एक औरत एक खाना जो है वो 2 घंटे में बनाती है, तो इसका मतलब है कि 4 औरतें वो खाना जो है वो आधे घंटे में बना लेना चाहिए उनको. लेकिन अगर 4 औरतें उस खाने बनाने में 3 घंटे लगा दें या 4 घंटे लगा दें, तो इसका मतलब ये होगा कि जाहिर है कि उसने और दूसरी खवातीन ने आके पहली खवातीन की आउटपुट को कम कर दिया. तो दिस इज द रिटर्न्स. और ये इसकी एग्जांपल बिल्कुल आपको लैंड के अंदर भी दी जाती है कि अगर एक पीस ऑफ लैंड है, उसमें आप बहुत सारे लोग एम्प्लॉय कर दें और लैंड आपकी फिक्स रहे, तो बहुत सारे लोग चलने फिरने से उसकी प्रोडक्शन को कम कर देंगे, या वो खुद ही उसकी जो प्रोडक्शन है वो खा जाएंगे, तो उससे आपकी टोटल प्रोडक्शन जो है वो नेगेटिव हो जाएगी. जो टोटल प्रोडक्शन है उसको हम टोटल फिजिकल प्रोडक्ट या टोटल प्रोडक्ट बोल सकते हैं, जो कंप्लीट प्रोडक्शन है. और उसके अलावा एवरेज प्रोडक्शन का कॉन्सेप्ट हो सकता है. एवरेज प्रोडक्शन का मतलब होता है कि ऑन एवरेज आपका लेबर कितना प्रोड्यूस कर रहा है. मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आपके पास 100 यूनिट प्रोड्यूस हो रहे हैं और आपके पास 10 लेबर हैं, तो एक लेबर की एवरेज प्रोडक्शन जो है वो 10 यूनिट्स है। और इसी तरीके से आपके पास एक कॉन्सेप्ट है मार्जिनल फिजिकल प्रोडक्ट का। मार्जिनल फिजिकल प्रोडक्ट का मतलब क्या है कि जब आप लेबर को एक यूनिट से चेंज करेंगे तो आपकी टोटल प्रोडक्शन में, टोटल फिजिकल प्रोडक्शन में कितने यूनिट से चेंज आएगा। अगर आप अपने लेबर को एक यूनिट से चेंज करेंगे तो आपके प्रोडक्शन में, टोटल प्रोडक्शन में कितने यूनिट का चेंज आएगा। तो वो जो चेंज है उसको हम बोलते हैं मार्जिनल फिजिकल प्रोडक्ट। This marginal physical product is actually the increment to the total production when you increase your labor by 1 unit. Okay. Now here is the chart. Now look at this. When your labor was 0, your total production was 0. When you employ the first labor, your total production increased to 3 units. And when you employ the second labor, your total production reached to 10 units. And when you employ the third labor, your total production increases to 24 units. Then the fourth labor added 12 more. Then the fifth labor added say for example 4 more. And the fifth labor, the sixth labor added just 2. And the seventh labor didn't add anything. The eighth labor decreased the total production. So if you look at the concept of average production, the average production is the total production divided by total number of people. So here, if you divide 3 with 1, you get 3. If you divide 10 by 2, 10 is the total production, 2 is the total number of labor. 10 divided by 2 will be equal to 5. And 24 divided by 3 is equal to 8. 36 divided by 4 is 9. 40 divided by 5 is 8. So these are all average production. What is the marginal product? From 0 to 1, your output increased by 3 units. From 1 to 2 workers, your output increased by 7 units. From second to third worker, your output increased by 14 units. From third to fourth, it increased by 12 units. From fourth to fifth, it increased by 4 units. And from fifth to sixth, it increased by 2 units. And from 6 to 7, it increased by 0. And from 7 to 8, it increased by -2. So you can see that how your marginal product is changing. Initially, it increased, but after some time, it started falling. And this fall actually turns into negative. And this negative is basically, of course, is something that basically is noticeable, that when you have got more labor, when you have got more, more labor than the machines, that basically is called the, that actually you have got the negative returns. Now look at their graphs, how their graphs look like. As we discussed, then saw the graphs of utility. Similarly, we can saw the graph of total production and marginal product, and we can also somehow draw the average production curve, but we are not drawing it here. We will be looking at the two curves here, the total production curve and the marginal production curve. Now look at the total production. This is the total production. For 0 unit of labor, it is 0. For 1 unit of labor, it is 3. For 2 units of labor, it is 10. And then basically it is keeping increasing and falling. So if you add, take the middle points of these bars and you draw a curve, this is called the polygon kind of a thing. So you get this kind of a curve. This is a total production curve. Now, if you look at this curve has 2 components. One is this, and the other is this. Rather 3 components, and there's another third one as well, which is this. Now, what is happening at the initial bits? Your total production is increasing at an increasing rate. What is happening in the second phase? Your total production is increasing at a decreasing rate. And what is happening at the third component of your total production curve? What is happening at the third production curve? Third portion of your production curve? थर्ड लेवल ऑफ प्रोडक्शन पे क्या हो रहा है भाई कि आपकी टोटल प्रोडक्शन जो है वो फॉल इंक्रीज होने की बजाय डिक्रीज होना शुरू हो गई है और जिसकी वजह ये है कि आपकी मार्जिनल प्रोडक्ट हैज स्टार्टेड फॉलिंग. So you can drive a curve from here, like, it's from this point, the diminishing returns kick in, and this is the maximum output. Now look at this. Here, what is your marginal product? When you increase labor by 1 unit, your total production increased by. When you increase your labor by 1 unit, your total production has increased by 7 units. Here the 7, which is total marginal product. You can take a point here. It is measuring the marginal product and it's measuring the number of labor the same. And if you draw all of these curves, you can have got this curve, which is called the marginal physical product curve or marginal product curve. The marginal product curve is generally an inverted U-shape, like inverted U-shape curve. Like, you remember that the marginal, your utility is a kind of like that, like, it increases and somehow it decreases. So it is also an inverted U-shaped curve. Initially, your marginal product increases, reaches to the maximum, and then it starts falling. And you can also see that it also enters the negative territory. The blue line in this lower panel shows average product. And you can also plot average product by looking at the, the curvature. And again, the average product curve is also an inverted U-shaped curve. It initially increases, then decreases. So this is the point where diminishing returns set in, and after that your marginal product curve turns negative. Slope turns negative, it does not turn negative. The marginal product becomes negative after this point. This point. The point D, the maximum output, and after that your marginal product has actually fallen this. So this is the average production. Average product is generally driven by the drawing a ray from the origin to the curve. Like, you can draw the origin. You don't need to be worried about this. But like, I've got the numbers for the average production. Okay, welcome back after the break. Before the break, we were talking about the production side, and we were looking at that how total production changes when you add more labor to your production process. Just keep this thing, remember that here we are assuming that machines or capital actually are fixed. We are not changing the capital, we are just changing the labor. And we saw that how our labor changes, how the total output changes when the labor we employ changes. And we actually have seen this, that like, that after a certain point of time, when you add more labor to the production process, the overall contribution falls of these labor to the total production. And when after reaching to the maximum production, sometimes adding more labor actually causes your production to fall. And we have got very good examples of that as well. Like, say, for example, look at Pakistan Steel. What has happened with Pakistan Steel? That has closed its operations, it was at one particular point of time used to be called as mother of all steel mills. It was such a gigantic structure. It was such a big investment that could actually, like, give competition to any company, any kind of production facility anywhere in the world. But somehow it ceased functioning. It stopped functioning, and it has become sick, and it is dying day by day. Now, what happened and what went wrong with Pakistan Steel, like, along with also many inefficiencies and corruptions, the biggest thing that actually has caused its fall is the number of people employed in Pakistan Steel. At one point of time, there was a study conducted by some international agency. At that point of time, there were 25,000 people working in Pakistan Steel. According to the report of that particular agency, the Pakistan Steel at that point of time could be run with only 7,000 people. So at the place of 7,000 people, the Pakistan Steel was employing 25,000 people. So you can imagine that, that what happened with its total productivity. The total production actually fell, and it kept falling all the time. It didn't increase, it didn't pick up, because, the number of people actually kept increasing because of the political interference and because of the political, kind of influence on the management of the Pakistan Steel. So you can imagine that how badly the number of people or labor can affect the total productivity. And this Pakistan Steel that was created to support the whole Pakistan has ceased functioning now. It doesn't even have got enough money to pay the salaries of the employees, the permanent employees. They always have to borrow money from the central bank, from the central government, to make the payments to the salaries, in the salaries to their people. Now, basically, we are going to look at another side of this story. I am telling you the story of the background to supply, that what actually increases or decreases your supply. In the first phase, we looked at that how the production changes, how the total production of a firm changes when number of labor increases or decreases. Now, basically, we are looking at the costs associated with this production. Any producer, when he decides to supply commodities in the market, he or she always consider the costs of production. Like, if the cost of productions are more, their profit margins squeeze in terms of the prices, so they basically supply less. So if the cost of production is low and the prices are high, their profit margins are high and they supply more. So now we shall be looking at the costs, short-run costs. And again, by the short-run here, we mean it is the period in which at least one of the factors of production is fixed and the other factors of productions are variable. So it means that we will have got two kinds of costs, the variable cost and the fixed cost. The variable cost will be related to the variable factors of production, and fixed cost will be related to the fixed factors of production. Okay. Now, the fixed costs and variable costs. The basic definition of the fixed and variable cost is the cost that vary with the level of output. The cost that varies with the level of output, that is called the variable cost, and the cost that does not vary with the level of output is called fixed cost. Like, again, if I give you the example of your electricity meter, that meter rent that you pay every month does not depend that how many units you consume in that month. So that is a fixed cost. The variable component, actually, which you pay for the per unit consumption, will be depending on that how much more units you use. If you use 300 units, your bill will be according to 300 units consumption. And if your consumption is, say, for example, 500 units, your bill will be according to the 500 units consumption. So the fixed and variable costs are the costs that are related to the fixed and variable factors of production. All right. So the total, if you sum up these two costs, the fixed cost and the variable cost, you get the total costs. So you might have got the total fixed cost, total variable cost, which make you total cost. And this is how we can write the total cost. The total cost is equal to total fixed cost plus total variable cost. Now look at this. The fixed cost is the cost that does not change with the level of output. You can see here the table. When the output is 0 unit, your fixed cost is 12 pounds. When your output increases from 0 to 1, still your total fixed cost remains the same. And your total fixed cost remains the same for all units up to 7, or it can go even further. But your total fixed cost is not changing. If you graph this curve, you will get a horizontal curve. This is a total fixed cost because this is not changing with the level of output. So it will remain fixed on the y-axis where you are measuring the fixed cost, the total fixed cost. So the total fixed cost curve will be a horizontal line. It will increase on the x-axis, but it will not change on the y-axis because the total fixed cost is not changing with the level of output. Okay. Now look at the total variable cost. What is happening with the total variable cost? It is continuously increasing, but the increment actually that is happening is different. Like say, for example, from 0 to 1 unit, the total variable cost is 10 pounds. From 1 to 2, it is 6 pounds. From 2 to 3, it is 5 pounds. From 3 to 4, again, it is 7 pounds. And from 4 to 5, it is 12 pounds. And from 5 to 6, it is 10 pounds. And then it is like, 31 pounds. So you can imagine that, how the total variable cost changes. Initially, your total variable cost increase with decreasing rate, but after some time it increases with increasing rate. Now, this is how your total variable cost look like. Your total variable cost will be 0 for the 0 unit of output. So it is the curve that starts from the origin. Initially, this cost increases with increasing rate, and then this cost increases with decreasing rate. And why is this happen? Why do you think this happened? What is happening here right now? We have learned about the production. Production में initially जब आप लेबर को increase करते हैं तो आपकी टोटल प्रोडक्शन इंक्रीज करती है इंक्रीजिंग रेट से, और कुछ अरसे के बाद जाके टोटल प्रोडक्शन इंक्रीज तो करती है लेकिन डिक्रीजिंग रेट से करती है, और कुछ अरसे के बाद वो नेगेटिव हो जाती है. यहाँ पर वही फिनोमिनन है. देखिए, जैसे जैसे अगर आप मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आपका लेबर प्रोडक्टिव है तो आपकी वेरिएबल कॉस्ट कम आएगी. यानी आपने एक लेबर लगाया, जब एक लेबर से दूसरा लेबर लगाया तो उसने जो आउटपुट दी वो पिछले लेबर से ज्यादा दी, तो आपकी वेरिएबल कॉस्ट जो है वो कम आ जाएगी. वेज तो आपने उतनी ही देनी है, लेकिन उस प्रोडक्शन की जो कॉस्ट है, क्योंकि प्रोडक्शन ज्यादा हो रही है, इनिशियली आपकी जो टोटल वेरिएबल कॉस्ट है इट इंक्रीजेस विद डिक्रीजिंग रेट, बिकॉज इन द इनिशियल पार्ट ऑफ योर प्रोडक्शन increases, productivity of your labor increases with increasing rate. That is why their average, their cost, total variable cost increases with decreasing rate. But from the point when the total production increases with decreasing rate, the total variable cost increases with increasing rate. I hope you're making you're getting this.
No sir.
नहीं समझ में आया आपको?
नहीं सर. सर ये 60 से डायरेक्ट 91 पे जो गई है, इसकी क्या वजह है? मतलब इतनी ज्यादा अचानक बढ़ना, और हमारे आउटपुट तो इतना कोई खास इजाफा नहीं है.
वेरी गुड. देखिए, असल में देखिए प्रॉब्लम क्या है. देखिए, आउटपुट का ताल्लुक नहीं है इसके साथ, इसका ताल्लुक है लेबर की प्रोडक्टिविटी के साथ. आप मिसाल के तौर पर एक काम करवा रहे हैं, आपने एक लेबर बुलाया. अब जब आपने दूसरा लेबर बुलाया तो दूसरे लेबर ने आपको उतनी ही वेज पे आपको ज्यादा प्रोडक्शन करके दी. तो ज्यादा प्रोडक्शन का मतलब ये है कि आपकी वेरिएबल कॉस्ट कम हो जाएगी ना प्रोडक्शन की. अगर आपका जो लेबर आप एक मजीद हायर कर रहे हैं, देखिए यहाँ पे असल में जो आपके पास जो है वो असल में जो चीज है वो है आपका लेबर के साथ इसका ताल्लुक है. लेबर का ताल्लुक प्रोडक्टिविटी के साथ है और प्रोडक्टिविटी का ताल्लुक कॉस्ट के साथ है. अगर आप लेबर लेकर आते हैं प्रोडक्शन के लिए और वो लेबर आपको पिछले लेबर से ज्यादा आउटपुट देता है तो आपकी वेरिएबल कॉस्ट ऑफ प्रोडक्शन कम होगी. अगर जो आप नया लेबर लेकर आ रहे हैं वो पिछले वाले लेबर से कम आउटपुट देता है तो आपकी जो फैक्टर्स, आपकी जो टोटल वेरिएबल कॉस्ट है वो इंक्रीज तो होगी लेकिन इंक्रीजिंग रेट से होगी अगर वो कम प्रोडक्शन दे रहा है. If you add total fixed cost to total variable cost, what do you get? Total fixed cost plus total variable cost is equal to
total cost.
Total cost.
Now the total cost 0. Sorry, 0 plus 12 is 0. 10 plus 12 is 22. 16 plus 12 is 28. 21 plus 12 is 33 in that way. All right. Here it is 91 and 12 is equal to 103. Now, if you draw the curve of the total curve, its slope will be exactly like the total variable cost because the other component of that cost is constant. Other component of this total fixed total cost is constant. So the variability into the total cost will be depending on the variability of the total variable cost. So the total cost will increase as much as the total variable cost is increasing, and they will actually have a parallel curve. So you can imagine, and why this total cost is increasing at a positive point on y-axis. I was asking you that why this total cost curve starts from the positive value on the y-axis. The reason is that the total cost will not be zero if the production is zero. Total cost will not be zero if the production is zero. Why? Because even if your production is zero, if you are not producing any output, still you will be incurring some fixed cost. Like say, for example, you have rented out a building, you have not started production yet, but you will have to pay rent for the period in which even you have not started production. All right. So that is what something is the concept of this. So after this point, like say, for example, you can see the point from where their curvature changes. Like, they start increases with increasing rate. It happens when the diminishing marginal returns set in. When the diminishing returns come into play, like say, for example, when you employ more labor, they give you positive output, but that output is less than the output contributed by the previous unit of labor, then your cost will increase. And this increase will be shown as your total cost will increase with increasing rate. And that is what basically is the point where your marginal return set in. So what is the marginal cost? The marginal cost and the law of diminishing returns. Look at this. Now look at this. This is what? This is marginal physical product of labor. And this is the curve that is the average physical product of the labor. Like, this curves we have seen already here. Look at this MP and AP. Okay. So if I draw it for you here, suppose that you have got two axes here. Your marginal product curve is like this. Okay. If your marginal product curve is like this, like it means that, what does it mean? It means that up to this particular point, when you add your labor, your output increases with increasing rate, and then your output increases with decreasing rate. Here the slope is negative, and here the slope is positive. Now, what will happen with the cost? what will happen with the cost? What do you think? Up to this point, when your marginal product is positive, your marginal cost will be negative. And after that point, after the point when your marginal product increases with decreasing rate, your marginal cost will increase with increasing rate.
सर ये कॉस्ट का दोबारा बताइएगा।
देखें, अगर मिसाल के तौर पर एक बैट्समैन है क्रिकेट में, उसका एवरेज स्कोर है 30, यानी ऑन एवरेज वो हर इनिंग में जो स्कोर करता है वो 30 करता है। अब वो बैटिंग करने के लिए आया है। अब सपोज करें इसकी जो मार्जिनल इनिंग है उसमें वो सेंचुरी स्कोर करता है। अब सेंचुरी स्कोर करने का मतलब क्या है कि वो जो इसने इस मैच में जो मार्क्स उसने जो स्कोर किया है वो उसके एवरेज से ज्यादा है। तो आपके पास अगर मार्जिनल एवरेज से ज्यादा हो तो एवरेज बढ़ता है, और मार्जिनल एवरेज से कम हो तो एवरेज कम होता है। ऐसा ही है ना?
जी बिल्कुल।
योर मार्जिनल, लाइक से फॉर एग्जांपल वो जो बैट्समैन है उसका एवरेज 30 है, लेकिन इस इनिंग में उसने स्कोर किया 100। अगली दफा जब वो आएगा तो उसकी स्क्रीन पे जो एवरेज लिखा हुआ आएगा वो 30 लिखा हुआ आएगा, 30 से कम लिखा हुआ आएगा, 30 ज्यादा लिखा हुआ आएगा?
30 से ज्यादा
जी, 30 से ज्यादा होगा यकीनन। तो आपके पास मार्जिनल और एवरेज में भी रिलेशनशिप होता है। जब तक मार्जिनल एवरेज से कम हो तो एवरेज फॉल करता है, और जब मार्जिनल एवरेज से ज्यादा हो तो एवरेज इंक्रीज करता है। और जो पॉइंट जहां पे मार्जिनल एवरेज कॉस्ट को कट करता है वो पॉइंट होता है जहां पे एवरेज कॉस्ट मिनिमम हो। उस पॉइंट के बाद एवरेज कॉस्ट इंक्रीज होना शुरू हो जाती है। आप लोगों को बात समझ में आ रही है? Okay, so this is the curve. This purple curve is the average fixed cost curve. आपको पता है कि average fixed cost curve always be like falling. हमेशा ये, वैसे तो खैर ये रेक्टेंगुलर हाइपरबोला होता है, लेकिन ये कि टेक्निकली अगर आप इसको समझिए कि मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आप देखें, आप यहाँ से सदर जा रहे हैं एक गाड़ी लेकर, अब आप एक पूरी गाड़ी लेकर जा रहे हैं, अब आपकी फिक्स कॉस्ट है एक पेट्रोल की कॉस्ट जो कि आपकी लगेगी। अगर आप एक आदमी जा रहा है उसमें तो उसकी फिक्स कॉस्ट, एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट ज़ाहिर टोटल होगी। मतलब आपको 100 रुपए का पेट्रोल लग रहा है तो उस एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट जो है वो 100 रुपए होगी एक आदमी की। लेकिन अगर आप किसी के साथ पुल अप करते हैं, किसी एक और को भी साथ इंक्लूड कर लेते हैं, तो एक आदमी की जो एवरेज कॉस्ट आएगी पेट्रोल की वो 50 रुपए हो जाएगी। अगर आप एक और आदमी को बुला लें, अगर 3 लोग हो जाएं तो एक की कॉस्ट, एवरेज कॉस्ट 33 रुपीज हो जाएगी। अगर आप लोग 4 हो जाएं तो कॉस्ट आपकी 24 हो जाएगी एवरेज। अगर आप 5 हो जाएं तो आपकी एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट 20 हो जाएगी। ज़ाहिर है 5 से ज़्यादा आप नहीं बिठाएंगे, लेकिन अगर आप इसको बढ़ाते रहें तादाद तो आपकी एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट कम होती रहेगी। मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आप एक गाड़ी में 100 लोग बिठा सकते हैं तो आपकी एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट 1% की पेट्रोल की एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट जो है वो 1 हो जाएगी, और उससे ज़्यादा करेंगे तो उससे कम हो जाएगी। तो जितनी ज़्यादा आप तादाद बढ़ाते रहेंगे उतनी ही एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट कम होती रहेगी। आप ये देखें यहाँ पर कि एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट का जो कर्व है वो कंटिन्यूसली फॉल कर रहा है। इसलिए फॉल कर रहा है क्योंकि आपको पता है कि एवरेज जो फिक्स कॉस्ट है, इस तरह मैं आपको एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट का वो दिखाऊं, यहाँ पर देखिए आपके पास टोटल फिक्स कॉस्ट जो है वो पहले वाले यूनिट के लिए कितनी है 12, दूसरे वाले यूनिट के लिए कितनी है वो 12 डिवाइड बाय 1 एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट। और दूसरे यूनिट के लिए 12 डिवाइड बाय 2 6 एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट हो जाएगी। तीसरे यूनिट के लिए एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट कितनी होगी 4, चौथे यूनिट के लिए 3, पांचवें यूनिट के लिए 2 पॉइंट समथिंग, 6 यूनिट के लिए 2 और 7 यूनिट के लिए 1 पॉइंट समथिंग। तो ये एक्चुअली जो है वो आपके पास जो कॉस्ट है वो मुसलसल कम हो रही है। तो इसलिए जब आप एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट बनाएंगे, when you will be dividing the fixed cost with the number of units that you are producing, then it will actually give you the average fixed cost, and that will keep falling. And this is the average variable cost. और आपको
सर
पता है
मिनी बसेस वाले जो है वो यही करने की कोशिश कर रहे होते हैं क्या?
सॉरी
हमारे यहाँ जो प्राइवेट ट्रांसपोर्ट में ये बसेस चल रही है, कुछ कर रहे होते हैं।
जी जी बिल्कुल, वो ऐसे ही करने की कोशिश कर रहे होते हैं। और अगर आप यूनिवर्सिटी के पॉइंट में ट्रैवल करें तो आपको इतनी हद तक वो भर लेते हैं कि लोगों को सांस आना बंद हो जाता है। तो वो इतनी ज़्यादा भरी हुई होती है बस कि उसमें लोगों को सांस नहीं आ रहा होता, और जाहिर है कि इतनी सफोकेशन हो जाती है। तो जाहिर है कि वो एक बड़ा मतलब दे ट्राई टू रिड्यूस देयर एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट। तो ये एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट रिड्यूस करने की कोशिश करते हैं। अच्छा, नाउ यू कैन, इफ यू कैन लुक एट हियर, लुक एट दिस कर्व, दिस इज एवरेज कॉस्ट और एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट। आपको पता है कि टोटल कॉस्ट जो है वो सम होती है फिक्स कॉस्ट की और वेरिएबल कॉस्ट की। तो जो एवरेज कॉस्ट होगी, एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट होगी, वो सम होगी किसकी? एवरेज वेरिएबल कॉस्ट की और एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट की। अब आप यहाँ पर देखें कि एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट में और एवरेज वेरिएबल कॉस्ट में यहाँ पे डिस्टेंस ज्यादा है, यहाँ पे डिस्टेंस वो कम हुआ, यहाँ पे वो डिस्टेंस और कम हो गया, और ये डिस्टेंस कम होते होते बिल्कुल जो है वो इसके नैरो आता रहेगा। ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है? Why is this happening that the distance between the average total cost and average variable cost is squeezing? You know, the difference between these two costs, this one and this one, is what? It is AFC, average fixed cost. And this average fixed cost, you can see here, it is continuously falling. So this distance between them is squeezing.
सर हर एडिशनल यूनिट के साथ साथ कॉस्ट कम होती जाती है।
एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट, देखिए इन दोनों का जो डिफरेंस है, एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट और वेरिएबल कॉस्ट का, जिस तरह यहाँ पे आप देखें ना, एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट, सॉरी, एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट किसके बराबर होगी? एवरेज वेरिएबल कॉस्ट प्लस एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट। तो अगर आप यहां से एवरेज जो है वो फिक्स कॉस्ट, एवरेज वेरिएबल मालूम करें, एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट मालूम करें, तो एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट किसके बराबर होगी? एवरेज टोटल कॉस्ट माइनस एवरेज वेरिएबल कॉस्ट।
वेरिएबल कॉस्ट।
और आप ये देखिए कि एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट का कर्व के साथ क्या हो रहा है, कंटिन्यूअसली डिक्लाइन कर रहा है। तो इनका जो डिफरेंस है वो कंटिन्यूअसली डिक्लाइन करेगा, ऐसा ही है।
यस सर।
ये बात जो है वो कुर्रतुलैन कह रही है, उनको समझ में आ गई, और लोगों को समझ में आई ये बात?
सर ग्राफ में नहीं आ रही, वैसे आ गई।
अच्छा, देखिए वैसे आगे तो ग्राफ में भी आ जानी चाहिए, क्योंकि इनका डिफरेंस जो है वो एवरेज फिक्स कॉस्ट है, तो वो जाहिर है वो डिफरेंस इनका वो होगा, तो वो जाहिर है कि आपको जो है वो डिफरेंस भी कम होगा। Now, under the topic of background to supply, we are going to look at the long run theory of production. Now, again, if you could recall that by the short run, we mean a period in which at least one of the factors of production is constant, whereas the long run is a period in which all of your factors of production are variable. So we are going to discuss a situation when you can vary all of your factors of production. When you can vary all of your factors of production, like say, for example, when you find that the continuously the demand for your product is increasing, you can increase the amount of production. And if you think the amount of your demand is decreasing, you can always decrease the production, and you can change both the amount of labor and amount of capital. Okay, so we are going to talk about this long run theory of production, and we will be seeing that what kind of decisions the firms take and how that decisions affect their costs. So again, keep this remember that we are now entering the long run, and the long run is a period in which the firm can vary all of its inputs. It can change labor as well as capital. It can change capital as well as labor. So everything can be changed, everything can be improved, everything can be increased or decreased over time depending on the demand of the products. All factors variable in the long run. Now we will be talking about the scale of production. You know, like what happens with your production when you increase all of your inputs. There could be three possibilities. The first possibility could be that if you double all of your inputs, your output also gets doubled. यानी पहले मिसाल के तौर पर आपके पास 10 लेबर थे और 5 मशीन्स थी और जिनसे आप 100 यूनिट प्रोड्यूस कर रहे थे. अगर आप 10 लेबर की जगह 20 लेबर कर दें और 5 मशीन की जगह 10 मशीन कर दें, इसका मतलब है यू आर डबलिंग योर इनपुट्स. नाउ व्हाट विल हैपन विद योर आउटपुट? If your new output is equal to 100, like 200, say for example. Now earlier on it was 100, now it is 200. You have doubled your inputs and your output has gone exactly doubled. This is called constant returns to scale. But if you are doubling your inputs, you are increasing your labor by 100% and capital by 100%, and your output is increasing by more than 100%. This is called increasing returns to scale. But if you double all of your inputs and your output increases by less than doubled, this is called decreasing, like, returns to scale. So you may have constant returns to scale, you may have increasing returns to scale, and you may have decreasing returns to scale. It will be depending on that how your total production is changing when you are doubling or increasing all of your inputs. If you are increasing all of your inputs, how your total output is changing. If by doubling your inputs, your output gets doubled. If doubling by inputs, your output gets more than double. If by doubling your inputs, your output gets less than double, then you may have constant increasing or decreasing returns to scale. Another topic associated with returns to scale is economies or diseconomies of scale. Economies of scale. Economies of scale means, like, when you increase the scale of production, when you double your level of output, when you double your input and your output gets doubled, or output gets more than doubled and your output gets less than double, it will show you that whether you have got economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, or what. You will be having economies of scale when you have got specialization and division of labor. When you have got, like, I'll be explaining these points bit by bit at the later stages, but like what is happening here, we are relating this economies of scale with this increasing returns to scale. This leads to what?
Economies of scale.
Because what is happening here, that you are doubling your inputs, your cost is getting exactly doubled. पहले जिस तरह आप 5-10 लेबर हायर कर रहे थे, आप 20 लेबर हायर कर रहे हैं, और आप जो है वो पहले 5 मशीन्स हायर कर रहे थे, अब आप 10 मशीन्स हायर कर रहे हैं. Your output has gone exactly doubled, but the production has increased by more than doubled. यानी आपने कॉस्ट इंक्रीज की, जितनी आपने कॉस्ट इंक्रीज की उससे ज्यादा आपकी प्रोडक्शन इंक्रीज हो गई. जिस तरह मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आप प्रिंटिंग प्रेस में जाएं and you ask them to print 100 cards of something, so suppose they would say you, like, say for example, you can, like, we will charge 1,000 rupees for first 100 cards, but if you want to get 200 cards printed, we can do this for 1,500 rupees. It means that for the first 100 cards they are charging 1,000 rupees, and for the second 100 cards they are charging just 500 rupees. This actually happens because of economies of scale, because they actually don't have to make die every time. Once they make die, once they make fixed cost, like, they incur the fixed cost, and after that, the more production they do, the lesser it costs them. So the economies of scale actually relative to the like if you double your inputs, if you double your output without less than or without doubling your cost, that is called economies of scale. Does it make sense? Yeah, and sometimes like this economies of scale, as you can have got the economies of scale, and economies of scale are achieved when you can double your output, or you can actually make your output more than double at the less than double cost. But similarly, you can also have a situation when you try to increase the level of production, but your cost increases by so much, and that happens because of the unavailability of raw material. That can happen because of the available like inefficiencies in the system. That can happen because of so many reasons, basically because, like say for example in Pakistan, we don't have got economies of scale. We are not efficient producer of goods. If we want to produce more, our cost increases by more than what we want to produce. So I hope it makes sense. और नहीं सेंस बनाता तो आप इसको पढ़ेंगे तो आपको ये सेंस बनाएगा इंशाल्लाह.
सर हमारे पास एक